Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Maner Costerisan's consulting webinar on exceeding stakeholder expectations and mastering your nonprofit's financial strategy. We're so glad you're here. Today, you will learn how to simplify your financial operations and minimize risk with process reviews, gain CFO level expertise for financial problem solving, and secure lasting impact through sustainability planning. Thank you all for joining us today. Few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded and everyone is muted. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat and we will have time at the end to answer your questions. With all that out of the way, I would like to welcome Sarah Jennings to today's session. Sarah is a principal in the Accounting and Outsourced Solutions Department and also leads the firm's Consulting Services Division. And in addition to her leadership role in consulting, she also leads the firm's nonprofit team. So thank you for taking your time to share your knowledge with us. Sarah, I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining. It's exciting to be here today. One of the best things about my job, honestly, is working with clients on helping to meet or exceed their goals and their missions and their visions. And honestly, over the last few years, that's predominantly what we've been focused on. We've been focused on ways that we can help just expand the conversation outside of the traditional financial realm and what we're doing on the financial reporting. So we're excited to be here today. So a few things that we're going to take a look at today, or our goals for the session, is to talk about what it means to be best in class for a nonprofit organization. Whenever we're talking about exceeding expectations or talking about impact to your stakeholders, we really have to talk about what does that mean? What does it mean to be a high-performing organization? Then we're going to go over some efficiencies, what it means to be efficient, what it means to be effective. We have to talk about the sustainability conversation, right? Every organization is talking about relevance and what it means to be sustainable for them. And then how do we show that we are impactful? That's a lot to get through in an hour. So I'm excited to get to work. As Cheyenne said, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I will monitor them and Cheyenne will definitely ping me if there's anything, any questions out there, and we will definitely have time at the end as well. So when we're talking about best in class and we're talking about strategy, how do we know if an organization is high performing? What are the things that that you think of when you think of a nonprofit organization being high performing or best in class? And if you want to put things in the chat, that would be great. I'll add to some of the thoughts that I had. But some things that come to mind, whether it's, just typing it in and saying, what is a high performing organization, or what are some key terms that people think of when they're talking about a high performing organization or a best-in-class nonprofit organization, they've got internal controls. We will talk about this a little bit more later, but we want to make sure that in a nonprofit organization in particular, you have controls in place to ensure that you're operating effectively and you're protecting the funds that you're receiving from members or from stakeholders or from funders. That you've got a fund balance. We want to make sure that if you're a high performing best in class, when we think of that, there is a fund balance. We're not, even though we're nonprofit organizations, we're not always operating at a zero balance. One of the other words on here is also reserves. We want to make sure that there are reserves out there so that you can take advantage of opportunities that come your way, or if there's something that needs to happen to further your mission, you can act on that. You don't have to wait and raise funds for every single thing that you're doing. A high-performing organization and a best-in-class nonprofit definitely has strategy. They have strategy, they have vision, they've got leadership that is exuding what that vision or mission is. Definitely, there's trust there. When we think about a high-performing organization, the best in class within your industry, we are talking about some organization that is very, very trustworthy, that we can see the impact that they're having. They're definitely solvent. They can pay all of their bills. We all know as nonprofit organizations, all of your financial information, at least the summary level, is public information. Your 990's out there. If you're trying to get in touch with stakeholders and donors, and they're looking to donate or to fund or to support organizations, they're going to want to make sure that it is sustainable, that it is solvent, that it is transparent, that everything's out there, that the organization has high integrity. And then the big word out here is relevant. We want to make sure that the mission of the organization, the mission, whether you're a trade association or a charitable organization, the mission is relevant, that what you're providing, what you're offering, whatever problem you're solving is a problem that others see. The organizations that you're supporting or the members that you're supporting them in ways that are relevant and they feel value there. So I think that when we talk about how to make sure that we're achieving success, we need to focus on these terms, focus on the why we want to be best in class, because this is what our stakeholders think about when they're looking for a great organization to support and to be engaged with. So the first thing that we'll look at is really efficiencies. So a quote that I think is interesting, there's a way to do it better, find it. Thomas Edison, he's known for the invention of the light bulb, but in actuality, he didn't invent electric lights. He made it all better. And what this conversation is starting to go into is really, how do we do everything we do better? It isn't necessarily an assembly line. We're not looking to definitely recreate the wheel in every single aspect of the organization, but I think it's a culture that we need to make sure that all of our team members, everybody in our organization, I apologize, I was not sharing my screen. We want to make sure that everybody in our organization is looking for better ways to do things. And since I wasn't sharing my screen, I am going to go back because I was reading off this word chart. Or word cloud rather. We want to make sure that everything that I was saying, everything that we're reaching for, we're striving for, these are the terms that the stakeholders are thinking of when they're thinking about a high performing, high functioning organization. So then when we're looking at efficiencies and what do we start thinking about? What do we consider? So I put this robot there because automation, AI, that's what everybody is talking about right now. Those are kind of the terms that we should be thinking about. But really the first step is just thinking about in your organization, what is unnecessary? Why are we doing things? If we can encourage our team to think like that, to ask the questions, why am I doing this? Why am I writing this down? Is there a better way to do this? And set aside time to really ask those questions. That's the goal and that's the key. The next thing, after we look at what are these unnecessary steps, are there ways to automate that? Are there ways that we can set, this is kind of the steps to AI, artificial intelligence, but are there ways that we can just make it automatically happen? Set the email response to automatically go to a member so that they're already getting a receipt. We don't have to manually tell the system to do something. Set a report to automatically generate and distribute to your membership or to your department heads or to your stakeholders. Set the reminders to your board. This sounds simple, but set the reminders to your board to automatically distribute to your boards, to automatically give the reminders to the board members or committee members that there are meetings, things like that. All of those little things that take, seconds per day, they really, really add up. And then we blend into artificial intelligence, which we're not going to get into all of artificial intelligence today by any stretch, but it is something that even the smallest of the small organizations really needs to start asking these questions, because if we don't start now, we're going to be behind the 8 ball years from now. We know that every single stakeholder, whether or not we have a $100,000 budget or a $500,000 monthly budget, we know that people expect things to be automated. They expect us to be using technology. So if we're not thinking about that, we're going to be behind the scenes. And then the last thing I'll say here, when we're considering change, when we're considering efficiencies, don't underestimate the need for change management. And what this means is you might have team members that are super gung-ho, that are really excited, that they are really trying to make sure that they are doing all these things, automating, asking questions, changing process. If you don't have that change management system in there, then it's going to be very, very clunky and very difficult. And the biggest piece of change management is just making sure that you have an abundance of communication. This is what to expect. And then you say, this is what happened. And then you say, this is how we reflect. And you continue to do that over and over and over again, so that all stakeholders in the process, all of your team members understand the why we're changing, the why we're trying to make things more efficient. It's not because we're trying to get rid of jobs. It's because we're trying to get everybody doing the most valuable thing that they can, so that we're all moving towards our mission and we're all trying to further what our organization was created for. So when we're talking about all of these efficiencies, we really want to look at different areas. So this clearly is not all of the areas within the organization, but these are 4 that we can start with. So if we think about the areas of finance, operations, human resources, and then member and stakeholder outreach and communications, that's what we're going to start to talk about today. Again, each one of these areas, you could have day-long brainstorming sessions on how best to automate, how best to streamline, and how best to operate efficiently. We're going to focus on these 4, and we're going to go through relatively quickly. So these are the areas. There's definitely follow-up that we're able to help with and help brainstorm with your organization after today. So the first one we'll look at is finance. Oftentimes we meet with organizations and they are kind of strumming along with their accounts payable. We don't have that many checks. We just write the checks, or we just print the checks and then have somebody sign them. Sometimes, over the past 5 years, we've heard a lot of people thinking about AP automation and changing the whole accounts payable process because they were physically handing piles of paper and invoices to a board member, and then they would physically take it to the executive director or the president to sign these checks. That is not the wave of the future. It doesn't matter if you are printing 10 checks or if you are printing 100 checks, it still is an inefficiency within your organization. The other thing on the accounts payable process that I always try to get organizations to think about is there are few instances that you should be processing accounts payable every single day. I mean, clearly, if you have a process where you have an abundance of invoices coming in, that may be an exception, and you're actually processing things every day, and that's a full-time job. Oftentimes we see people get an invoice and either it goes and it sits in a pile until you have time to do it every 2 weeks, or whenever you might have time, or they're picking it up and inputting it every time it comes in the inbox. We definitely recommend step 1 would be batch processing, making sure that when you're looking at your accounts payable and the invoices that are coming in, you're doing them in clumps of time. So for example, every single Tuesday, you're going to process all the accounts payable, and every single Thursday, you're going to pay all of the invoices that are outstanding. That's a routine process that will help make your finance life more efficient. The other thing with accounts payable, and now we're talking about the automation side, there's a lot of different products out there. Our consultants definitely are looking at this and trying to help organizations look at the cost benefit of AP automation. I won't go into all of the different names, but Bill, Concur, AvidXchange, there's a whole host of different programs out there that are not costly to your organization, and they really, really save time and energy. So instead of your organization trying to hand key in whatever the invoice is for, and then have somebody sign off all of the approvals to then print the check, some of these AP automation tools, they have optical character recognition. So they're reading the invoice, you're training it how to code it into your accounting system, and then it flows electronically through the system to get the appropriate approvals, the organization individuals that are assigned with authorization, they still will get copies, visual PDF copies of all of the invoices. They'll be able to see how it's coded, so how it aligns with the budget. All of those things are considered. And then instead of you printing checks, whether the signature is on there or not, the checks are printed and mailed outside of your organization. The ACH transactions are done automatically to your bank account. There's no exporting the ACH transactions and entering them into your banking system or some version of that. It's all streamlined. That at the end of the month, if you reflect on how much time goes into your AP process, is an incredibly beneficial thing to consider. The next thing that we hear a lot of pain points on is organizational credit cards. So if you, in the old days, we used to see shoe boxes, literal shoe boxes. I remember I was on some audits and we would be doing some credit card testing, and I would get a shoe box from an executive director supporting all of the charges that they had throughout the year, which is great, but clearly not the most efficient or effective way to get support with the transactions. So there's lots of ways that you can do that now, making sure that your credit card, each transaction aligns with the supporting receipt. So the first kind of baby step into this process is to have an Excel export of the transactions, and then all of your credit card holders are putting in the categories, putting in the account codings and the budget line items for you and attaching those receipts. That would be like step one as we're trying to expand on a spectrum of starting from a very manual process to going to something that's completely automated. And then we think about the rest of that spectrum is really going all the way to you have an app on your phone that, again, in the grand scheme of things is very, very cost effective if you take it into account the amount of time that your team is trying to chase down credit card receipts that are outstanding or they don't have, or trying to gather the data to code all of the credit card statements, how it reduces timeliness for financial statements if you're not entering those in real time. All of those things are a cost to the organization. So when we're thinking about implementing some of the controls and the workflow, if you will, of the credit card process, even though it is a per person or per user or per credit card transaction fee, you're still going to make out better because it's done and it's reportable, like now, real time. We've seen a huge increase in that. The same would go for expense reimbursements. Instead of people having to fill out a schedule requesting the expense reimbursement, it's all automated in a very, very similar fashion to the organizational credit cards. And I will, just one more point on the credit card. One of the things that we have heard a lot of from clients lately is they've got the same credit card that they have for the last, umpteen years, and it's working okay. Well, those credit card companies are also seeing this trend to automation and to the need for organizations to be efficient all the time. So they're actually oftentimes offering some of these services right within their credit card platform. So I would definitely say start there. And then also make sure you're looking at what rewards can come back to the organization. I was chatting with a client just a couple of weeks ago, and they actually paid for a team retreat to talk about some of the things that we're talking about today, all from rewards points from the credit card, the organizational credit card. So great benefits. We talked about accounts payable. We talked about organizational credit cards and expense reimbursements. Again, the automation of all of those things. When we talk about the revenue side of things, some efficiencies that we need to think about is how it's being booked in your accounting system. Oftentimes, especially with nonprofit organizations, we see a donor database that is completely separate from the accounting general ledger, or a membership database, or registrations, or PayPal, or constant, any of the things that people are paying a registration fee or registering for an event, all of those things are separate from the accounting system. These days, if your accounting system doesn't have any capability to either directly connect to some of these products, or at minimum import in from these products, it's a huge inefficiency, and you should be looking for a better way. Many of those products have direct integration tools that you can implement that will really, really help in all of the reconciliation when you're talking about reporting to your department heads, to people that are responsible for putting on the events, to people who are responsible for the donor outreach. You never want to be in a position where you're looking at the financial statements and you're reporting to the board on those, and then your donor teams or your donor relation teams get up and they have different numbers than you just reported on the financial statements, or your events team has different numbers than the financial statements. That's never a position that you want to be in, whether you're at the director level or you're at reporting to a board level. So make sure that you're at least considering those integration tools that you've got there. It will help in that whole reconciliation process, and it just reduces inefficiencies. It reduces error. The next thing is bank reconciliations. We still see, in sometimes it surprises us. We still see organizations when we come in and they are either doing bank reconciliations by hand on a piece of paper, or they're doing it in Excel. At minimum, they're not using the system. Most accounting systems out there, I would venture to say all accounting systems out there that we would recommend utilizing for any organization, it doesn't matter the size, all of them have a module in there that will help to do the bank reconciliation. So this is really showing the difference between what your bank says your cash balance is and what your accounting records say your cash balance is. A bank reconciliation shows what's in the middle. First step is making sure you're using the system, making sure you're using that module. There's less chance that whatever the end result book balance is, less chance that that's not actually going to tie to your balance sheet or your statement of financial position. We want to make sure that we're reporting, we're transparent, and all of that. The next step would be to link that banking information directly to your accounting system. So you're utilizing the system, utilizing technology to try to match those transactions together for you. Then reporting is the next thing. We want to make sure that we're not extracting the financial records from whatever your accounting system is and putting it into an Excel spreadsheet and then modifying that and getting it to the board. We meet so frequently with organizations that they just don't like how it looks in the accounting system. So instead of that every single month or every single quarter or whatever the frequency of their board meetings are, they export it to Excel. They do all of these manipulations to the financial statements, and manipulations in this setting, I don't mean to be a negative term, but they change the formatting and then they spit it out to the board report. And it's clunky, it's cumbersome, but oftentimes people say, well, it just doesn't do it. Well, that's not always the answer. Maybe it doesn't do it now, but that doesn't mean it can't do it. So again, the big thing in the finance realm that we recommend is work to reduce Excel reliance. We have so many Excel spreadsheets. They're not going to be gone, but we definitely, when we're talking about efficiencies, we want to look at every single Excel spreadsheet and say, why am I doing this in Excel? Why am I not using the system? The next area that we'll look at is operational inefficiencies or efficiencies, clearly, that we need to focus on. So we really need to look at internal communications. We go into organizations and, our organization isn't alone. How are you communicating internally, and how are you communicating with your team, your leaders, your board? Are you using Teams? Are you using Slack? Are you using text messaging? Are you only using email? All of those things are things that it sounds silly, but you need to be clear on what the expectations are. What is appropriate for a Teams note? What is appropriate for a text? What is appropriate for an email? And what is appropriate for a phone call? In this day and age, it sounds like we're reverting back and giving direction to elementary school kids. But in this day and age, we have to be clear to our team, or we're never going to meet expectations. And if we're not meeting expectations, we're not going to be efficient. We're not going to be reaching people the right way. The next thing is file storage. So many organizations have moved from a server-based systems to the cloud, which I highly recommend. We all absolutely are supportive. It makes for a more efficient workplace for sure. But in that transition, we haven't all taken the time to make sure that file storage system is set up appropriately. We haven't always taken the time to get rid of things that are way past due in our document retention policy. We need to make sure that when we're looking at file storage, we're looking at ease of access, we're looking at ease of retrieval for archival documents, and that we're consistently doing the same exact thing. We've got rules in place so every person on the team knows where it's supposed to be. It's not every person on the team stores things where they like to store them. It is a little bit painful sometimes to implement, but in order to be a highly functional, highly efficient, and effective organization, you've got to get there. Clearly, expense reductions fall under operational efficiencies. So there's lots of things the finance team actually can do to help support the operations folks and making sure that they've got the right data so they can make those determinations and really look at the right areas for expense reduction. The next thing that I'll say for operational efficiencies that we love to work with clients on is just their meeting cadence. How frequently are you meeting, and what does your meeting look like? Is it a meeting where it's just a round table? Sometimes there's a good reason to have those sorts of meetings. Sometimes if you have them too frequently, it just turns to chaos. There's no to-dos, there's no agenda, there's no follow-up action items. Again, there's absolutely a time and a place and a need for inadvertent or in just touch-ins, meetings, weekly meetings sometimes. But oftentimes we get into this meeting cadence where we're meeting because it's on the calendar. We don't really have an agenda, which means we're not efficient in our time. I have not met with a person, I'll say in the last 20 years, that has said, oh, I've got all sorts of time, oodles of time to have extra meetings. And I just like to get together with people. We all like contact. We all need that human interaction, but we all are doing more with less time. Every single person I meet with says that they're doing more with less time. So we need to make sure that when we're in meetings, we have our time for chit chat and catching up, but we also have a very succinct agenda so we can get things done. We need to make sure that operations is driving the conversation. Much of the structure, the infrastructure, operations, whether it's information technology or operations, whatever is under that umbrella, they're driving how we're going to be efficient as an organization through tools like Office or the Google Suite or whatever that baseline structure is, that oftentimes is driven by operations because we need to figure out how we're communicating internally. The next area that we definitely recommend and always look at is human resources efficiency. So again, internal communication. So we talked about teams and chats and things like that. What about announcements that you need to make as an organization? Where are all of those things going? Some of it will absolutely fall back on operations and how you're using the technology and what the standards, what the expectations are. But some of it is available right within your payroll platform. We're used to, in the old days, we would look at a payroll platform, and the purpose of that platform was to process payroll and to report on payroll. Now it is much, much, much more robust than that. There are platforms for those communications so that you are celebrating with the team, so that you are sharing out announcements with the team, and it's all housed in one place so that you don't have people looking for where was I supposed to go for this benefits enrollment? Or, I want to congratulate my colleague on this great big donor win that they had, or because they met their new member goal. All of that can be done within the platform, within many of the platforms. If we just look and open our eyes and ask and say, how is there a better way that we're doing this? Again, ask the question, stop and ask, why are we doing it this way? The other thing is enrollments. There are lots of things, again, within the platform that we can do to ensure a more streamlined enrollment process, making sure that benefits changes. I'm skipping over just a couple on the bullet points, but these two kind of go together. Benefits changes. Are people having to reach out to the HR team or to the finance team on a regular basis to change their benefits? Well, can we give them access to change some of those things or change some of their options on their own? How are we doing this, and are we using the system effectively? The next thing is onboarding, the same exact thing. We see so many organizations that they don't have a consistent onboarding process. If you have 5 people in your organization, or you have 50 people in your organization or more, you still have to have a good onboarding process. I think any HR executive would say now we're with the talent war, to use an overused phrase, the talent war that we're all in. Everybody comes in the door with the expectation that you are a high-performing, high-functioning organization, and they're going to be given the right information pretty much on day one. Nobody wants to come into a clunky process. We want to make sure that we're selling our organization. That first impression is great, just like everybody else. And in order to do this efficiently, oftentimes we can use the system. Again, if you've got a nice, robust platform, you also can use various different tools within a Google Suite or an Office suite to make sure that you're looking at how can this be efficient if you're not outsourcing it all together. And I won't go too much today into considerations of outsourcing some of these things, but I think that we have learned over the years, we collectively as a society, is people have skill sets, and it might cost a little bit more in the short term to outsource something, but if that outsourced or that project that we outsource helps us to be more efficient for the future, then that's going to save us time and money and allow us to really fulfill our mission going forward. Payroll processing, making sure that is efficient. If you are hand keying in things, that's not efficient. There's got to be a better way. And I work with our teams a lot, and I just always am asking, well, what are you manually doing? Is there a better way? Because in today's day and age, I feel like I should push a button. I have said so many times, and all of our teams do, if I can order from Amazon and I get something at my door this afternoon, I feel like I shouldn't have to type in all of these numbers. That just doesn't make sense to me. Or I shouldn't have to be waiting for an email for somebody to give me their timesheet when they could have entered it at the end. Clearly, there is some accountability. We need to make sure that people are following the processes that we put in place and using the technology after we've set up the system. But the first step that we have to do is make sure that we have the system set up and we're using all those tools effectively. We talked about benefits changes. Training is another thing. And I put this under human resources, but clearly a lot of training is very, very focused on whatever you're doing. So this would be applicable to finance, operation, membership, everything. It is so easy for us all to say, I'm going to view that webinar later, or I'm going to do that later. Or I don't have time for more Excel training, or whether it's soft skill training or whatever that is. We have to make sure as an HR department that we're using all of the things that we can to make sure that we're holding people accountable for that, and we're giving access to training at the right time. This is under efficiencies, because if we have standards as an organization that everybody is growing personally and professionally, and that we're having additional training, it's also up to us to at least consider if we can make that easier for everyone, if we can make it more streamlined, if we can make it more efficient. So within, again, your HR payroll platform, oftentimes there are training programs right there. I've seen a lot of, whether it's meeting structure, operational systems, they have trainings that are right within the meeting, kind of the planning guide, that platform, and you can assign things so that people know this is part of your day. It's an expectation that you do this. Excel is a great one. Excel has so many features, and if you have a team that, again, I'm a finance nerd, so Excel is my best friend at times, but if you have a team that doesn't know at least the basics of Excel and they're using Excel, then it is inefficient to not send them to training, even though it's hard to find the time to actually do it. So again, and this is across all of them, make all of the different categories, make sure you're using the systems that are available. Don't discount it because of the price until you actually do the cost benefit analysis and you really weigh how much time you're spending or wasting or using on a weekly, monthly, annual basis, and how much the module is actually going to cost you to implement. The next area that we'll look at is just membership outreach and communication. And again, this whole section is really about efficiencies and how we can make sure that we're using the systems the right way. And we're talking about this because if we're continuing to show our stakeholders that we are responsive, that we have great service, that we're able to communicate with them and engage with them on a regular basis, the more stakeholders we get, the harder that is. The more members we get, the harder that is. The more transitions we have in board members and so on and so forth, all of that, the more communication mechanisms, it gets to be incredibly overwhelming. And we cannot continue to add people to solve the problem. One, because of all of the generational changes that we're seeing, there's not as many people in the workforce to be able to do that. But two, the people that are coming in have learned to utilize technology so much that they're not happy if we put them in to an antiquated system. We have to make sure that we're using all of the resources. So easy step is making sure that if you have emails out there to an inbox or something, have an auto response. Or if you have a receipting process where somebody is submitting a donation or they are doing their registration, they're automatically getting a response and all of it set up. Here's your registration information, or here's the webinar information. All of that can be set up in almost every system to automatically happen. So you aren't having anybody that is manually emailing out all of those registrants or anything like that. It sounds incredibly simple. Yet sometimes we come into organizations and it's just these little bitty things that haven't been thought of. And maybe they have been thought of, but no one has prioritized that enough to take the time to set down and set the system up. Look at forms versus emails going out. If you send out a form instead of an email that says, hey, who has time for a meeting, or who wants to get engaged with this, or could you email me back your thoughts on how everything went, or even a fillable PDF is attached and we'd like you to fill this form out and return it to us. Consider a form that they're filling into fields, a web-based form through Office, or Google has forms, Office has forms. There's all sorts of platforms and applications out there. If you send it out as a form instead of an email, all of the data is compiled for you so you can look at it effectively instead of you transferring all of these PDF documents that you got into another document so that you can analyze it. Little steps that can really, really help you be more efficient in this area. Another thing, and a lot of organizations have seen that they're not as costly or as difficult to implement as they were, 10 years ago when I first started looking at chatbots. But if you have a membership area, those chatbots are the things, and I am by no means a techie. I know enough to say that it should be considered, but I wouldn't be the one that would implement any of it. But a chatbot is something that pops up and says, hey, do you want to chat? This is a great way to start that engagement conversation with your team. Do we need this to make sure that our members or our donors are engaged? How could we use this chatbot to make sure that easy questions are answered and it doesn't come into our inbox, which everybody is trying to manage? Then focused communication and messaging, making sure that every communication that goes out is efficient. And when I say efficient, that means that you aren't over communicating to the wrong subset of your membership or your stakeholder base. We want to make sure that we've got all of this data, and that's the last bullet point, use the data. We've got all of this data that tells us about our member, that tells us about our donor. Oftentimes, we just don't know what to do with this abundance of data. Look at that data. We'd love to have a conversation. There's lots of people. Just have a brainstorming session. We have all this data. What should we be doing with this data? How could we communicate better because we know this about all of our members, or we know this about all of our donors? Looking at the times of year when people are donating or responding or registering for things can really help you be more efficient in how you're communicating, when you're communicating, and over and above that, when you're providing the program. So again, just making sure you're using the data and the tools. The other thing that I'll just say overall with this, and this is really just a big picture technology conversation, make sure you know what tools are available. Don't assume that because you've been using this custom software package for the last 30 years, that that's the best answer for you now. I'm not saying it's not, but don't automatically assume that it is because your organization is too complex or too different or too whatever the case may be. Things have changed dramatically, even in the last 3 to 5 years, on what is out there, what's available. There are all sorts of technology tools and resources that you can use that make the most complex organization much simpler from a user interface perspective. So we've talked about the importance of efficiencies when you're talking about high performing, making sure that you're communicating, that you are seen successful and have strategy with your constituents and your stakeholders. Now we're talking about effectiveness. So what does that mean? Strategy execution, accountability, and movement forward. Those are the big picture things when I think of having an effective organization, what we're doing and what we need to talk about. So what do we need to be effective? A clear vision. So when you talk about strategic planning, oftentimes we go into organizations or we have conversations with our clients and, we see their strategic plan. It's a great strategic plan. Sometimes it's an operational plan, but clearly for the next year, maybe 2 years, it gives them direction on the pillars or the action items that they feel they need to do. Sometimes it lacks the vision. So why are we doing all of these operational or strategic things? Make sure that your entire team understands how all of that aligns with the vision, with the mission, with where your organization is going to be 10 years from now. If you are clearly communicating that with your team and your stakeholders, then it's easier to hold them accountable to have people think about efficient processing to get there, because we've got that buy-in. So make sure that that is incredibly clear and concise. Then we said, in order to be effective, you absolutely need to be efficient. If you're not efficient, then you can't be effective. We go into organizations, and I know I sound a little bit like I'm going in a circle, but we go into organizations and talk about accountability and talk about effectiveness. Well, if you give somebody, we're all busy, if you give somebody that's busy another task and it's an inefficient task, the probability of them being effective is slim, right? Because we're adding a cumbersome process to a leader or a donor or a board member that they don't have time for in the first place. They want to be effective, but in order to do that, we have to help people be efficient, whether that's our team members or that's our board members or that's our donors or stakeholders. Again, part of our job as nonprofit leaders and nonprofit team members is just making sure that we're setting up the structure so that our organization can continue to the future and be effective. So we need to make sure that we're always focused on that efficient process. Once we've got that efficient process, we need to make sure that we've got the right people. And I'll say, I've never sat with a leader of an organization, nonprofit or for-profit, but a nonprofit organization, and they say, we just have all the wrong people. You have the right people, or you wouldn't have hired them in the first place. Sometimes what happens is you hire the right people because they understand your mission, they understand your vision and your passion and the cohesion of your team, but they're not in the right seat. So make sure you have the right people and they're in the right seat. And if they're not, we have to make sure that we're holding them accountable to either change the attitude, change the output that they're doing, or potentially change the seat that they're sitting in. We need to make sure that we've got the right people in the right seats. Oftentimes, we see people that are growing into different positions, but if they're not growing with the proper training and experience and guidance, then we're setting them up to fail. That would be another situation where we may not have the right person. And again, this isn't necessarily something where you're talking about, you're cutting people. That is not this conversation at all. When you go into trying to make sure your organization is completely successful and effective and, reaching all of the stakeholders and everybody understands how important your mission is, it isn't a negative conversation. It is going into the room saying, I'm confident we have the right people, or we wouldn't have hired this team in the first place. Now we need to make sure that we're all working together for the same clear vision, using efficient processes so nobody is frustrated and in the weeds, kind of churning away. And we're doing what we have the highest and best use for. The last piece, and probably the hardest piece, is accountability. We love working with organizations and internally. Accountability is something I think everybody will work at forever. What's the best way to hold yourself accountable as well as your team members? And again, when we're working with organizations and there's lots of operating systems that kind of abide by this, it's not a finger pointing thing. You didn't do it, I'm slapping your hand. It's, shoot, we didn't get this done. Why? Why is it? Do you have too much on your plate that you can't get this done? Do we have the wrong process in place? Are you not the right person on our team to be trying to accomplish this? We really need to get to the root of why we aren't getting our actions done. But once we have this clear vision, we have the right processes in place, the efficient processes, the right people doing them, and hold everybody accountable to play our part, be the team member that we know we are, we're really going to be successful. And that is an effective organization. And I just put on here, say what you mean, do what you say. So many organizations, in order to be effective, we have to be transparent and we have to be able to have open conversations with each other. And sometimes that is difficult. That's okay. if it's difficult, but we have to be able to say it. We all respect each other. We're all working together for the right mission, but we have to be able to say it out loud and then do what you say. That's the accountability piece. That's the self-accountability piece. Just make sure that we've got the right systems in place, that if you can't, or your team members, or if I can't be accountable to something, we know the why and we change that for the future. The next piece that we've got is sustainability. Sustainable, the ability to maintain or support continuously over time. So how do we make sure, when we're talking about successful nonprofits and making sure that you're driving to change, driving to growth, driving to success, that we are sustainable, which is really the key element. So what does sustainability really mean to you? There's lots of different things. McKinsey & Company has lots on sustainability, and they say as sustainability becomes more of a strategic and operational imperative, which it is for nonprofits, always has been, for globally, even for-profits it is now, executives must lead the way to set up a sustainable organization that's right for their company. So really, what are we looking at when we're talking about sustainability? Relevance, risk management, and future strategy. So when we look at the column of relevance, we have to be considering this when we're talking about sustainability. Sustainability isn't just, do we have enough money to pay payroll? Do we have 3/4 of our budget in our reserves so that we can be sustainable? That is not the end of the story. That's a piece of the story, but certainly not the end. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about societal changes. Is our organization, is our nonprofit, is our mission still relevant? Have there been changes, external factors that are changing, government, legislative things that are changing, that changes the relevance of our organization? Do our stakeholders still think we're relevant? Do they still need whatever service we're providing, or whatever member benefits that we're giving? And then what competitors are out there? I've seen where organizations absolutely were relevant for their time, and they sat back and they weren't thinking about sustainability. They weren't thinking about strategic growth. They weren't thinking about the future of the organization and really the world. Competitors came in and built a brand that had greater relevance for today and the future than them. Nonprofit organizations. So all of the amazing work that they had done for years, if you don't think about sustainability in the future and your strategy and the vision, if you don't think about all of those things, competitors are going to come in, and nonprofits have competitors just like for-profits do. Competitors will come in and kind of absorb that share, those stakeholders, those donors, those members that you had relied on for so many years. The next area is risk management. So when you're talking about sustainability, I mentioned earlier, making sure that there's reserves in the bank. So clearly you need to make sure that you've got funds, right? But you also need to make sure that you're sustainable because you have internal controls in place. We want to make sure that you've done risk assessments. That's one of the team. We have a team that loves going out and doing risk assessments, because so often nonprofits, for-profits, but organizations, they accept risk because they don't think they have the people. They don't have 2 people to open mail every time it comes in the door. There's other ways to mitigate those control issues or those risks that you have. And it's really, really important to think globally about the risk management of the organization. Look at insurance policies. There are so many different insurance policies now, it is overwhelming to start to look at them. There's people that can help you evaluate those things. There's board members that can help be tasked as kind of a subcommittee or a task force to help look at your insurance policies to make sure that they're sufficient. Do you have it to cover all the board members, to cover all the members? Thinking about if you have events that are off-site, who's covered and who's not? Do you have insurance for lawsuits? There's all sorts of things. The cyber insurance is something that we need to make sure is there. More and more organizations or insurance companies rather have fine print, which is absolutely reasonable, but you have to be doing at least a minimal level of cybersecurity and have minimal internal controls, or they're not going to cover you. You need to make sure you understand your insurance and that you've got the adequate policy out there. Cybersecurity, we would be remiss to not talk about cybersecurity and the importance of a risk management plan. In this whole conversation, you will not be sustainable. There are few organizations that will not be hit with a cyber threat, with a cyber attack in the future, if you haven't already. And sometimes you just don't know it. but it happened. So we need to make sure that you've got the proper security in place. All of this is about being sustainable because you know that your constituents, your donors, your members are relying on you protecting their data, are relying on you making sure that you've got the right controls in place. Cybersecurity assessments, similar to the internal control risk assessments, are critical to do and not just do once. You have to look at those on at least an annual basis. Physical security, that seems like it's clear, but we absolutely still occasionally will see organizations that don't have that. They have, just a drawer with all of the money in it, or a drawer with their greatest assets in it. Well, if you just have a drawer and nobody's locked it, nobody's monitoring that, nobody's reconciling it, the security is not enough. And then asset protection. Make sure that you've got the right copyrights on things. Make sure that people aren't using your assets that you've created and not paying you for them. This is a nonprofit issue. We know that there are so many tools and resources that nonprofit organizations sell licenses for or get royalties for. Make sure that you've got somebody following up to make sure that your assets, your non-physical assets are protected. And then the last category I've got in sustainability is the future strategy. We have to make sure that in order to be sustainable, you have to talk about direction. You have to know where you're going, and everybody has to be going there in the same path. So making sure that your direction is aligning with the mission and the future vision, making sure we're talking about environmental, social, governmental considerations, ESG, making sure that you are at least aware of what that means and what that could mean to your organization for the future. I don't think it's going to impact definitely not smaller organizations or even larger nonprofits, directly in a huge way in the near future, but it is something that every single consumer is thinking about right now. Every single might be a stretch, but a lot of consumers are thinking about right now. And then multi-year budget to reach the vision. A one-year budget is great. It's a good plan to get your operational things done. But if you have future strategy that is going to need an investment in anything, that's going to need an upgrade in technology, that's going to have a revamp of a platform or need a consultant to look at your platform. Though some of those platforms are so incredibly robust, but if you try to tackle that by yourself, it will not be as impactful as you need it to be. So make sure that you're looking beyond the 1 year when you're looking at projections. And then the next thing that this is the sustainability.org this is actually a book, the sustainability mindset, pardon me. One of the things that they recommend is looking at a matrix, and really they're saying impact is the vertical, profitability is the horizontal. This helps to show organizations and boards where all of the programs set. That doesn't mean that you won't have something that's on the lower half or on the left side, low profitability, but might be high. So upper left-hand quadrant, that means that it has an incredible impact, but it's not profitable. It can't pay for itself. This map helps you as an organization to be able to look at how are we paying for the things that are really impactful, that are really driving us forward. Because again, this leads into the last bullet point that we've got to chat about today, is showing that you're impactful. So if going back to this slide real briefly, this map, we are showing the impact that we have on a matrix to our board and to our team members. That allows everybody to be on the same page, be transparent about what we're doing and what is helping to support our vision and mission. So when we talk about impact, what we're trying to say is, how do we show that, right? How do we report on our impact? Clearly, we have a lot of data. When we're showing on how to report, how do we report on impact? We start with all this data. From a financial perspective, it could be lots of numbers. It could be lots of member points, data points, lots of data. Every organization at this point has an abundance of data. We don't always know how to get to it, but we have the data somewhere. So our job as leaders within the nonprofit world is to take that data and move it up this pyramid into information. So once we've kind of whittled it down, we categorize things, we slice and dice it, do some data analytics, it becomes information. So it's starting to say, this is what happened. Now we use it a little bit further. We do some more analysis and whittle it down even further. We can use it for insight and then to tell a story. So this slide, this pyramid that we've got here kind of shows the evolution of data points to reporting and telling a story. What would be next after insight is that storytelling and making sure we're telling the story of our impact. So a few do's and don'ts when we're reporting or we're telling this story about impact to do. It's important to be consistent. Do your due diligence. Look at how you want this to be presented and how you want to represent what story you want to tell, and then do it that same way. I'm not saying that it's going to be perfect the first time you try to change your reporting or really report on impact, but you must make sure that you have some consistency, or people will lose interest. They won't know what it is that they're looking at. So you have to be consistent, and you have to be able to show the reports and then comparables to previous periods. Be transparent. We're not hiding anything as a nonprofit. Again, oftentimes accountants, there's one financial report for sure. There's accurate numbers and there's not accurate numbers, but I can definitely present them to tell a different story. That's not hiding anything. That's making sure that we are transparent and we're saying, these are all the good things, these are all the bad things, and the right people know where they are. Then report on predefined key performance indicators and pillars. So now we're going back to our effective conversation. We know we're efficient. We know that we have talked about with our team and with our leadership what it takes to be high performing and what success is. So now we have to, before we start reporting, we have to say, what tells us we're doing a good job? How do we know that we're on our way to our vision 10 years from now? What are we doing on a weekly, on a quarterly, on a semi-annual basis, on an annual basis to get where we want to be? And how do we show that visually to our leaders, to our board, and to our stakeholders? And then show the trends and expectations. Sometimes what we think is going to happen doesn't. That's not a bad thing. I mean, we have to be able to think and rethink. There's a great book by Adam Grant. Actually, it's called Think Again. I reference it frequently. I love it and would recommend it to anybody. It's a pretty quick read, but in the principles in it are relatively, they're just very easy and commonsensical. So what he's saying is really, don't be afraid to think again. Don't be afraid to rethink a decision, because the world is changing so quickly. If you aren't ready to rethink something that happened, if we show an expectation and the trends that we're seeing doesn't hit, that's okay. Don't ignore it. Put it out there and say, okay, we were wrong. What do we have to do different? And this is absolutely, whether you're a membership organization or a donor-based charitable organization, something that we have to do. And these are things that we don't report in piecemeal. Don't report just a little piece and not include things that are critical to those people using that report. We have to make sure that we don't report something and at least not be transparent and have some sort of a disclaimer, or something that says, hey, this information isn't here and this is why. That's important to the conversation, or you're going to lose trust. People are going to think you're intentionally hiding something. Don't frequently change formats. We talked about that. Don't clutter the information. It has to be clear. And I've got some slides to kind of show what I mean by that. Don't dwell on the details. It is not hiding anything. It is not being transparent to show consolidated information or kind of rolled up information to your board. It is not worth their time, and their value should not be looking at minutia detail of a $100 transaction. That is not where they're bringing their value. But if we as professionals, as leaders, are showing them the $100 odd thing that happened, that's what they're going to look at, not the swing of $50,000 in membership or in donations or something like that. They're going to see that odd $100 transaction. So we need to make sure that we don't dwell on those minor details. And then don't cater to the micromanager. We need to make sure that we need to make sure that when we're doing this reporting, we're looking at big picture and we're reporting to the whole. If somebody has a question, we're never going to not answer that as leaders, but it might be an offline conversation because you don't want the whole entire meeting, the whole entire board meeting to go down a rabbit hole. That reduces the impact that you're trying to report on. So the next couple slides are just examples of things that these are kind of templates that we've used for clients, but there's lots of different software packages out there. This is something that is for a membership organization just to think about. This data could also be presented in a traditional financial statement report on revenue. Absolutely could. Budget to actual. This tells a better story. This draws your eye. This makes me see members by region, for example. That part we usually wouldn't have necessarily on a financial report, but this is still a concise one-pager. And if I am somebody, if I'm a leader in an organization and I'm trying to figure out what we need to do with membership to get to where our vision is, this is impactful. I'm almost done. I know I'm pretty much out of time. So this is another area where we can show engagement. It's important to show these visual aids. Engagement shows impact. How are we engaging our donors, our stakeholders, the community? This helps us to show and tell that story. These are other things. It's more concise. This is what happened. How did we show what our goals were? What are those operating results or key performance indicators that we're trying to hit? And what do we want it to be? How do we tell that story? These are clear and concise ways to show that instead of a 20, 30-page board report that we're going through. Again, showing the impact instead of just showing the data. So I'll end with a quick quote from Lou Holtz. My family is definitely a Lou Holtz and football family. Without self-discipline, success is impossible, period. And I put this in here because we've talked about it, accountability. We've talked about the success. How do we make sure that your nonprofit is set up for success and is moving forward to the right vision of the board aligning with the mission? So I know we are pretty much out of time. I am happy my contact information is out there, and I know that Cheyenne is chiming in now. We're happy to answer a few questions now, or we will be in touch afterwards.
Okay, thank you so much, Sarah. There was one question about the book. Do you want to show that quick again? It was blurred in the background there.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, it is blurred, but it's Think Again by Adam Grant. I didn't realize my background is blurred, but it is a great book. I have the audio and the hardcover actually because I wanted to be able to highlight things. So it's a good one.
All right. Well, I think we are 1 minute over, so we can get wrapped up here. But thank you all for joining us today. Tomorrow on Wednesday, November 8th, we will be emailing out a recording of this presentation and the slides to all who attended. Sarah's contact information will also be in the email. If you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to her. And also be sure to be on the lookout for an email regarding our final nonprofit education series webinar, 9 topics in 90 minutes. And that's going to be on Thursday, November 16th from 10 to 11:30 a.m. Our nonprofit accounting experts have gathered your most commonly asked questions and will provide answers to help nonprofit leaders handle financial matters confidently and clearly. CPE will also be offered during that webinar. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.